but it's setting everything up to make it as clear and as smooth as possible for that consumer to sign up for whatever you're delivering from a subscription standpoint. I think a pitfall that a lot of people do is they look at this more from a finance standpoint, so from a revenue standpoint rather than a consumer experience standpoint. And what we recommend is you flip it. You first design it from a consumer experience standpoint, and if you do that right, then you have nothing to worry about. The revenue will just start flowing in.
Welcome to the Tearsheet Podcast. I'm Tearsheet Editor-in-Chief, Zack Miller. Many people know Ingenico as a manufacturer of payment terminals. Over years, the company has acquired firms in the digital payment processing space. Our guest on the podcast today, Andrew Monroe, runs the e-payments division in North America, helping large multinational merchants accept payments from consumers around the world. Through his decade at Ingenico, Andrew has seen a lot of payment trends. In our discussion, we talk about the growth of subscription payment models and how firms can effectively implement them. We discuss how to effectively implement data strategies around optimizing conversions online. Andrew shares how firms can enter new markets with digital payments and services. Andrew Monroe is my guest today on the Tearsheet Podcast.
So my name is Andrew Monroe. I work for Ingenico. Currently, I'm the general manager for North America for the e-payments division of Ingenico. So most everyone understands Ingenico historically as a manufacturer of payment terminals. Over the past many years, Ingenico has acquired a number of companies in the e-commerce and m-commerce payment processing space. And so I operate in that part of it. So I help enterprise level merchants, most of them large multinational merchants, accept payments from consumers across the world. And my focus is on North American headquartered merchants.
Interesting. And you yourself have been with Ingenico for 10 years, is that right?
A decade, exactly.
Yes.
Celebrated my decade last month. Thank you.
And you've moved around. So can we start out by, I guess, describing how the U.S. market or North American market differs from maybe some of the other geographies you've been in?
Correct. Yeah. So I moved back to North America. So I'm originally from the U.S. I don't know if you can tell by my accent.
Yeah.
But I lived in Europe for about 7 or 8 years prior to coming back to the U.S. about 3.5 years ago. And yeah, there's definite differences in the merchants, in the way in which you engage. There's cultural differences, there's professional differences, but there's also, I guess, a needs difference depending on the profile of what a European merchant is looking for based on what a U.S. merchant is looking for. Europe is quite unique in that there are so many small countries with so many unique cultures all huddled right around each other. And it's not just a kind of a social cultural type of thing. It's also a payment culture. So if you can take the word culture and associate it with the way payments are understood and the preferred payment methods, et cetera, they vary greatly, from these smaller countries that are all almost on top of each other in Europe. And so what you see from a European merchant is they're used to the concept of a cross-border payment more so than a US-based merchant. So the US is more homogenous from a payment product standpoint. There's less choices from a consumer standpoint. If you go state by state, you're not going to see that much of a difference from a consumer preference standpoint. But in Europe, it's very different. Payment preferences vary wildly, based on country. And so European merchants are more forced to be up to speed on the different payment cultures that are surrounding them more so than US merchants. But all that's changing due to the increase in digitalization and also the increase in internationalization of goods and services.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about that. So say on stateside, we obviously have a unified currency, but are merchants expand, I guess, laterally into other types of payment methods like either crypto, or are there other alternatives, I guess, that are creeping up in the U.S. market?
There are disruptors that are in the U.S. market, yes, and I believe they're following, more global trends. So what you see is there's a lot of open banking, so making bank-based payments real time, making them, more transparent from a reporting perspective. That's a trend that you see a lot in Europe, kind of originated out of London, but it's spreading across mainland Europe. We're also seeing that here in the U.S. There's always the crypto. I think that's a less mature payment method, that's out there. But the technology behind crypto, so whether it's the application of blockchain or whether it's actually using crypto as a mechanism to be a payment method, that is still something that is being worked on here in the U.S. as well as globally. But there's also the e-wallets.
Yeah, I was gonna say digital
Those types
wallet
of
adoption's very
yeah,
different
and
stateside versus Europe, right?
yeah, exactly. And so you see different trends, whether it's Europe or whether it's the US. But the US is moving more towards a banking or e-wallet or less of a credit card intensive um, payment method mix, if you will. Because if you look at the data, the US is one of the most credit card reliant countries in the world. I guess based on especially some of the Asia Pacific or more some of the European countries.
Interesting. I want to shift gears now into a topic which is interesting. We kind of hit a Tearsheet. We hit on this at two different points, but subscription models, and I know that merchants are that it's becoming a more popular trend there. I just spoke to a banking CEO that has made a nice business out of a subscription model bank account. And we're seeing that more and more, at least in some of the digital banks that are rising. So can you talk a little bit to that trend of subscription models, and I guess what are best practices in implementing them?
Sure. And so I guess if you provide a little bit of background to the current situation that we're in and what we see as the hastening of the subscription economy, the subscription business model over the past, I would say 6-8 months. It's been accelerated by COVID. I'll put it that way. Because everyone's lives have been disrupted. And so things that we were used to accessing either face-to-face or in, some sort of a point of sale payment aspect, for a long time we couldn't do. And therefore people were forced to get those same experiences, get access to those same media or physical goods through a digital channel by either, using a website or using a mobile app, etc. And there's different ways of actually getting that content. A subscription is just one business model. There's one-off payments. There's kind of the free-to-play approach where you give some of the content for free and then you monetize other parts of the content. But what we've really seen is the subscription has kind of emerged, at least post-COVID, as one of the fastest growing business models. And it's not just, historically subscriptions have been reserved for certain types of goods and services. But now you're seeing subscriptions applied, like you mentioned, to banking. You see car companies offer subscriptions. So I can pay a few $1,000s a month and then get access to a whole fleet of BMWs or Porsches and just swap a car at any time. So you see car companies, auto manufacturers turning towards subscriptions. You see pet food companies that, understand your buying habits of how frequently your pets eat and then offering you a subscription service to automatically deliver the pet food based on what they know from your data, based on when they know your pet is going to run out of food. And the convenience of the subscription payment, I think, is why it's becoming such a preferred method of payment for consumers, because you can set it up from the beginning and then you don't have to worry about it. Literally stuff, if you set up a subscription for the pet food, it just arrives at your door and you don't have to worry. So the convenience factor, the consumer experience when a subscription payment is set up correctly is very, very good. And that's what we believe is driving a lot of the uptick that we've seen.
And on the merchant side, it's not so simple as just swapping out a one-time payment for a subscription payment. Are their business models kind of changing as well in addition to the revenue model?
Yes. And so effectively running a subscription payment, there's a whole science behind it. And there's a lot of data points that we collect, that a merchant collects even before the payment process, that will allow them to effectively convert a consumer from somebody who is just browsing into somebody who's not just signing up to buy something, but they're signing up to buy a recurring purchase of, the goods and services that you're offering. And so it's really understanding the customer. It's creating the right user experience on the website. And then it's offering the right ways of monetizing based on what you're offering. And there's not one way to do this. It really depends on, the demographic of the user that is buying, what the goods and services are. But it's setting everything up to make it as clear and as smooth as possible for that consumer to sign up for whatever you're delivering from a subscription standpoint. I think a pitfall that a lot of people do is they look at this more from a finance standpoint, so from a revenue standpoint rather than a consumer experience standpoint. And what we recommend is you flip it. You first design it from a consumer experience standpoint. And if you do that right, then you have nothing to worry about. The revenue will just start flowing in.
Interesting. And so you mentioned sort of this feedback loop with data. How does Ingenico, I guess, provide that feedback to its merchants and to give them a richer, I guess, experience in terms of targeting and converting their customers.
Yeah, and that's why it's super exciting to be doing this in 2020 and going into 2021, because, access to data, I think big data, I'm doing air quotes right now, that buzzword has been
I could
around
feel it
for,
on this end. I
yeah,
can't see you, but I could feel it. Yeah.
yeah, it's been around for a while. So it's been around for well over a decade, and in fact, probably a couple decades. But we're seeing a lot more practical use of it. And, companies are now forced to understand and forced to intelligently use data. And the output of that is really exciting, because you can use all of these different data points to create a very, that consumer experience I was talking about, to create the exact consumer experience that you need. And so for Ingenico, we've broken down the checkout process, or I guess the payment process, if you will, into between 4 and 6 different kind of major events, starting with the checkout process and then ending with either a refund or a reversal or some sort of anti-payment or reverse payment. And each one of those, we've identified a bunch of different kind of subsegments of areas that can be optimized. So just on the checkout page itself, so the checkout experience, so this is after, if I'm a consumer, after I've already decided to buy something and I've put it in my shopping basket, I'm about to click that buy now button. So a lot of the work's already been done. We found 26 points of optimization to optimize just that checkout experience, for a merchant. And behind those 26 are, of course, millions and millions of rows and columns of data that can be analyzed. And then you get into, fraud prevention. Then you get into, authorization and converting a payment. And then you get into, settling and actually getting the funds into your account. And each one of those different events, there are multiple ways of, or I guess, areas of optimization. But the only way that you're going to know is if you have access to the data behind each one of those monetization areas.
Interesting. I also want to talk about this idea of entering new markets. That could be geographic, or that could be, I guess, lateral to a market that a merchant plays in with digital payments and services. This is not just greenfield work. This is like exploratory, I guess, like new types of markets. Like, can you talk about how you've seen your clients, I guess, best perform that?
Sure. And again, I think 2020 and going into 2021 is a good time to be considering going international, or, going cross-border, whatever you want to call it. There's been a lot of developments in the past 5 or 10 years, especially in the past 5 years, whether it's, the increase of proliferation of online shopping, whether it's trade agreements amongst countries, whether it's more efficient delivery networks, kind of everything combined has made it simpler than ever for a company to decide to offer their goods and services cross-border. We focus a lot, or at least we've been forced to focus a lot more on digital goods and services in a I guess we're currently in COVID, but a post-COVID world, being in COVID as we are right now. And when you're offering a non-physical good and service, it makes going international even easier, because you don't face the logistical challenges or some of the specific VAT or tax challenges that may be assessed on physical goods. So if I'm a merchant and I'm offering, truly a digital good or a service, now is the right time to consider taking that and figuring out, the best markets to enter from an international or cross-border standpoint.
Got it. And, a few years ago, like Omnichannel was like something we were hearing all the time on the podcast. And is that table stakes now? Like, have we done a good job doing Omnichannel, particularly internationally?
Internationally, no. So omnichannel is a difficult concept, just because, well, for a lot of reasons. The theory of omnichannel makes perfect sense. And, I've seen very good implementations and rollouts of omnichannel in certain countries, but a true cross-border omnichannel solution is one that everyone is still trying to crack. It becomes increasingly difficult where, there's things like the way that the software on the POS machine communicates and how that interfaces with the online ordering system, and making it seamless to device, so it's more of from a consumer experience standpoint, obviously you want the omni-channel to be available regardless of what POS device or regardless of what you're using. You want it, available everywhere. And that's been a really hard one to crack. But Again, what'll be interesting for me to see at least how the effects of COVID will affect the developments for Omnichannel, because a lot of Omnichannel was really driven on that mix of physical payments versus non-present payments or virtual or e-commerce payments.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're seeing a shift way more towards e-commerce payments and less physical payments because of the quarantine and everything. So it'll be interesting to see what that does on the Omnichannel developments.
So just asking a corollary to that question, I guess, how have you seen merchants react to COVID? How what are some of their struggles? How are they surviving? How are they thriving in this market?
Yeah, I've seen the full spectrum. So some merchants are really struggling. It depends on the industry that they're in. It depends on the demographic and kind of the goods and services they're selling. And yeah, I mean, especially if you're in travel and transportation, this is a tough market. But, I've also seen the opposite, where I've seen merchants have to deal with an unexpected surge of demand. A demand that in January and February of this year, they had no way of forecasting. And then you face scalability issues. Then you face, the ability to actually meet that demand. And that's a good problem to have. But if there's not a good foundation set before that, then it can be really challenging for companies to scale their systems and to meet the needs of the increasing consumer demand. And that's what we're really helping out with. So, we're doing kind of both sides of that spectrum there. So for the merchants that are now, facing a decrease in demand, we're helping them plan and, really get their systems at the level they need to be to hit the ground running and to really take full advantage when things start to recover. We're seeing a slow recovery, but as things really start to pick up. And for those merchants that were hit with kind of an unexpected, everyone all of a sudden wants my products, whether it's e-learning, whether it's the digital delivery of exercises and stuff like that, whether it's anything that people are now requesting from their homes, we're helping them with kind of the structural things they need to do in order to meet that demand, but then doing it in the right way. Because the last thing that you want is a surge of customers that come to your site or come to your app that want to buy your product, and you're unable to convert them. You're unable to actually take their payments. It's a tremendous waste of an opportunity. And so that's what we're really helping those clients with.
I guess that's a good segue into my last question for our interview today. We're in the back end of 2020. It's been a crazy year, unexpected year for everybody in the market. Like when you're looking into 2021, like what are your biggest priorities in the North American market? What are you guys looking to do from product perspective, rollout perspective, service perspective? Like what's on your plate?
Can't go into specifics, but generally speaking, just hyper-focused on the consumer. So really, really understanding the dynamics of the consumer, and having that understanding allows us to work with our merchants to create the best user experience. If you don't understand the consumer, if you're not, taking the consumer first approach to the way that you design either, for us, it's more of the checkout experience and the whole payment experience. But even just taking that beyond what, Ingenico focuses on for merchants, you have to have that good understanding of the consumer. And so that's what we're going to continue to do. Just one kind of easy stat that we like to throw around here is, our data shows that almost 42% of customers are likely to drop off and search for an alternative website if their preferred payment method is not allowed at the checkout. So there's big numbers behind not understanding your consumer and not tailoring your experience to meet the needs of those consumers. So that's going to be our biggest focus, because if you do that, then you're not only going to take advantage of any increased demand that you might have now, but if the demand isn't there now and you're expecting it to return sometime in 21, you can set it up now to where when that demand does come back, that you're already ready to handle it. And then you can help your business grow and rebound as quickly as possible.
Andrew, thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet Podcast today.
Yep. Thanks a lot.